I stood frozen at the edge of my cornfield, jaw slack, watching a bulldozer casually rip through my land like it was some abandoned sandbox. A banner hung from 2 wooden stakes in the ground. Future site of HOA community pool. Opening soon. My corn was being reduced to mulch. A backhoe had already carved a gaping wound into my irrigation line, and some guy in a reflective vest waved at me like I was the one trespassing. I'm not just the owner of this land. I'm the county's zoning director. And in that moment, as I watched a cement truck roll in like it owned the place, I knew someone was about to regret everything. It had only been 3 days. 3 days away at a zoning conference just 2 counties over. I'd left my assistant, Marcus, in charge of checking on the cattle. Everything was in order, and there hadn't been a single email, voicemail, or call alerting me to any permits or work orders for my farm, which made sense because I hadn't filed any. I didn't need to. This was my land, privately owned, agriculturally zoned, and legally registered with the county for over 15 years. So imagine the whiplash when I pulled up and saw a line of HOA members standing under a pop-up tent, sipping lemonade like they were waiting for the grand opening of a country club. I parked in the gravel drive near the barn and stormed toward the construction area. The guy in the vest, who turned out to be the site supervisor, introduced himself as Darren and immediately started rambling about some community development initiative approved by the HOA board. I tried to interrupt, but he handed me a clipboard with some of the most suspicious paperwork I'd ever seen: generic parcel numbers, an expired survey map, and something handwritten about a verbal easement with the previous property owner who, for the record, died 6 years ago. I asked Darren who signed off on this project. He casually pointed toward a woman in oversized sunglasses holding a latte like she was judging a beauty pageant. Karen. Karen, of course. She didn't see a problem. "Oh, you must be the tenant or groundskeeper," she said without even looking directly at me. This plot was annexed by the HOA last month after a board vote. We're developing it into a community pool. Don't worry, we've already notified the proper channels. I told her I owned the land. She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, and told me to take it up with the county if I had a problem. I told her I was the county. She laughed, but I didn't laugh back. Karen continued talking like she was trying to convince herself more than me. According to her, the HOA board had rezoned the edge of their community, which she claimed extended to unused farmland adjacent to the property line. Except the property line wasn't adjacent. It was a full 2 acres away. The paperwork she referenced looked like it had been drafted in a high school civics class. Nothing had been submitted through proper zoning channels. No applications, no hearings, no environmental impact assessments. Just a bunch of signatures, some forged, some illegible, and all worthless. I told her calmly but firmly that she and her board were trespassing on private property and conducting illegal construction. She blinked, clearly not expecting resistance, and snapped, "This is community progress. You're blocking it. That's probably a fine, by the way." Then she marched off to yell at a poor intern struggling to inflate a pool party balloon arch. I left, not because I was giving up, but because I needed ammunition. The kind that came with documents, maps, and cold, hard law. Back at my home office, I pulled every zoning file on record for the surrounding parcels. My land was clearly marked as agriculturally zoned, never subdivided, never donated, never reassigned. The HOA's reach stopped exactly where my fence began. I even had drone footage from the month before showing my crops thriving on the very spot now flattened by a cement roller. But the next morning, things got worse. The HOA had upped the pace. They were pouring concrete now. Fast workers were hauling in rebar, shaping what looked like a shallow foundation and erecting temporary fencing. I stood at the edge again, unnoticed, while one of the HOA members cheerfully narrated the whole process to a small group of residents who had no idea this wasn't even legal. I heard things like, "It'll raise our property value," and Karen worked so hard to make this happen. One guy suggested they put a gazebo next to the pool for weddings. By noon, Karen had organized a picnic-style gathering complete with folding chairs, a giant cooler of sparkling water, and printed brochures claiming the farm was part of a donated green belt. When I stepped forward again, she gave me a smile that looked like it belonged on a crocodile. "You're back," she said. "You should really stop interfering. The board will fine you for obstruction." I told her if she didn't stop, the fine she'd be facing would come from the county court, and they'd make her HOA fees look like pocket change. Again, she laughed. It was almost admirable how completely delusional she was. I went quiet after that. No more threats, no more arguments. Instead, I prepared a zoning freeze order and gathered every piece of evidence I'd need for what was coming. Satellite images, soil impact studies, every permit they didn't file. I scheduled an emergency meeting at the zoning board under Code 44, encroachment of private farmland. I made sure county inspectors were available for site review. I also placed a few calls to the sheriff's department, just in case someone needed reminding that zoning law came with legal enforcement. The next day, a fresh batch of signs went up around the property. Pool groundbreaking in 10 days. There were flyers posted on community mailboxes boasting open swim hours and summer splash parties. They even included a QR code for residents to donate to a deck upgrade fund. Karen was going all in. She genuinely believed this was going to work. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know the woman she kept calling farmhand was the same person who reviewed every zoning application in the county. She didn't know her whole fantasy pool was about to be labeled an illegal structure, ordered for demolition, and possibly result in felony-level charges if she didn't reverse course soon. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make her wish she'd never laid eyes on my fence line. Let her keep building. Let her think she'd won. The deeper they dug, the deeper the hole she'd fall into. By the next morning, the sound of cement mixers had replaced birdsong on my farm. The entire lower field, which used to be reserved for rotation crops and seasonal grazing, now looked like a low-budget construction site run by people who had never read a zoning manual in their lives. I stood behind the tree line, arms crossed, watching workers pour thick gray concrete into a framed-out pit. What made my stomach churn wasn't just the blatant illegality of it. It was the way they were doing it so confidently, so arrogantly, like the land had always been theirs and I was some squatter they were evicting in phases. I spotted Karen again, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and shouting instructions while sipping on something out of a wine tumbler that practically screamed HOA royalty. She gestured around with a rolled-up blueprint, like a queen directing the building of her summer palace. My first official zoning freeze notice had been issued the day before, delivered to the HOA's listed office, posted publicly on the county site, and even emailed to Karen's inbox from the county server. Not that it mattered. They either ignored it or assumed it was just some bureaucratic bluff. Maybe they thought if they built fast enough, I'd be forced to sign off on it retroactively. It happens sometimes in other districts. Unethical boards gamble on the already built argument to guilt inspectors into approval. But I wasn't one of those pushovers, and this wasn't a lost cause. This was my land. They'd already cracked one of my irrigation lines, which caused my north pasture to dry out within 24 hours. I had to redirect the water manually, running hoses up from the secondary tank just to keep my cover crop from withering under the heat wave. And the damage didn't stop there. One of their utility trucks had rolled over the fencing near my goat pen, and if it hadn't been for a quick fix with some wire and an old gate, half the animals would have wandered into their mess of a job site and caused more chaos than they could ever imagine. Which, ironically, gave me an idea. The next morning, just as Karen prepared for her so-called planning ceremony with her board members, I opened the lower gates and led my cows toward the construction site. Not forced, not herded, just a simple morning routine changed up slightly with some feed buckets rattled to encourage them toward the disturbed area. The cows, being curious and motivated by the smell of grass and spilled snacks, wandered into the open area between their flimsy temporary fences. The reaction was instant. One worker tripped over a plastic chair, trying to avoid a curious Holstein that licked his face. Another screamed as a large cow knocked over a foldable table holding all the fancy donuts and party favors. Karen shrieked and tried to wave them off with her clipboard, only to get mooed at loudly in return. It was glorious. Cows don't care about your agenda. They don't care about your HOA politics. One of them stepped directly into the pit, trampling the framing for the shallow end of the pool. Another one knocked over Karen's coffee, sending her running in panic like her life depended on caffeine. And through it all, I just stood there near the fence, arms folded, expression calm, as if I didn't know what caused the stampede. One of the HOA board members yelled at me, "Call animal control. This is sabotage." I replied with a straight face, "They're livestock on my farm. Maybe your pool party's in the wrong venue." Karen was livid, stomping over to me with her shoes half sunk in the muddy edge of the worksite. She screamed something about safety, property values, and lawsuits. I asked her how she planned on suing the legal landowner for using their own animals on their own land. She couldn't answer. She just stood there, red-faced, mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form a spell, and stormed off after her ruined planning ceremony. But even that didn't stop her. 2 days later, she organized a full ribbon-cutting event. It had decorations, a speaker system, an outdoor grill cart, and matching polos for her little HOA squad. There were balloons with printed text saying Future Oasis and a sign listing projected membership fees for residents. I couldn't believe my eyes. She even had a local photographer setting up a camera drone to capture aerial shots for the community newsletter. Karen was so deep in her fantasy that she had completely disconnected from reality. It was no longer a question of whether they'd stop. She had clearly decided that momentum alone would turn this fantasy into truth. The moment the photographer's drone went airborne, I took a picture of it from my phone, geotagged the location, and emailed it to the county compliance office along with 10 more images of unauthorized concrete work. I also included audio clips from her impromptu speeches, including the one where she claimed the land was donated to the HOA by an absentee farmer. I made sure to highlight that I was not only present but very much not absentee, and the farm had never been up for sale or donation. The final push came from the contractors themselves. Apparently, the foreman hadn't received full payment upfront. When the HOA delayed their next installment, claiming it would be cleared after community fundraising efforts, the crew got suspicious. I paid them a visit on the second morning of the ribbon-cutting week, introduced myself, and asked if they were aware the land wasn't HOA zoned. Their faces dropped. Darren, the lead contractor, muttered something about how he assumed they'd gotten permits. I handed them copies of the zoning notice along with a letter stating that any further work would constitute trespassing and would be liable for civil penalties under state code. It was the first time I saw the entire crew pack up mid-task. Cement bags were half unloaded, scaffolding wasn't even fully assembled yet. But the moment the foreman realized he could get sued personally for continuing construction, he signaled the end. The trucks rumbled out of the driveway one by one, leaving Karen speechless as her grand plan crumbled like a bad sand castle. She tried to save face by holding the ribbon-cutting ceremony anyway. She and her remaining loyalists posed for photos in front of the unfinished site, while ignoring the fact that the contractor banners had all been removed. No one from the press showed up. No neighbors. Just a few confused board members holding paper cups and wondering if they should start backing away slowly. And I let her do it. I let her stand there pretending it wasn't all falling apart, because sometimes the fall hits harder when it starts with a little hope. I didn't need to crush her yet. She was doing it all on her own. And the next phase, the official zoning inspection, was about to arrive with fines, with citations, and with a court order she definitely wasn't ready for. 2 days after the failed ribbon-cutting ceremony, Karen appeared at City Hall like a hurricane disguised as a soccer mom. She barged through the front entrance with her entourage and towel, flinging open the doors of the zoning department like she owned the place. Her voice rang through the corridors before she even reached the reception desk, demanding to speak to someone with actual authority about her pool project being unfairly targeted by jealous bureaucrats. The receptionist, who had already seen the entire paper trail I submitted, remained politely silent and simply pointed her toward the zoning conference room where a hearing had already been scheduled under her name. Karen didn't realize I would be the one presiding. When she stormed into the room, she was mid-rant, flinging accusations at vindictive farmers, backward land owners, and zoning laws that haven't been updated since the dinosaur age. but her voice faltered the moment she saw me seated at the head of the table. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment, I thought she might spin around and flee. She didn't. Instead, she stammered, then forced a weak smile and tried to recover. "Oh," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. "How convenient that you're here too." I didn't smile back. The meeting began formally. I listed the zoning complaints, backed with timestamps, satellite images, and the county's official map. I read out the official cease and desist order and the dates it had been delivered. I cited the unauthorized excavation, the damage to my irrigation system, the unpermitted event hosted on my property, and the false advertising circulated via community flyers. Karen interrupted frequently, trying to spin each point into a misunderstanding or community oversight. At one point, she claimed that the pool was meant to be a gift to local youth, which was particularly laughable since she previously insisted it was private access only for HOA members. Things truly unraveled when I dropped the final file on the table. A list of signatures from the easement agreement her board had submitted, several of which were confirmed to be fraudulent. One belonged to a deceased property owner, 2 others didn't match any known resident, and one was traced back to a landscaping employee who'd admitted to signing whatever paper Karen handed him. The room fell quiet. Karen's voice had no rebuttal. All she could do was blink and mutter something about clerical errors. But the silence didn't last. In the corner of the room sat a representative from the county legal office, and he calmly informed Karen that submitting forged documents during a zoning process could be considered criminal fraud. Her face paled. The room temperature dropped a few degrees. Her voice returned, shrill and shaky, as she began blaming her legal advisor for the confusion. The advisor in question turned out to be her yoga instructor's husband, who had once taken a paralegal class online and offered to help the HOA with paperwork in exchange for free pool access when it was finished. Karen's defense was unraveling faster than a clearance aisle sweater. As we exited the hearing room, she followed me down the hallway, her tone suddenly shifting. She tried flattery first, calling me a woman of principle and someone who clearly cares about the community. When that didn't land, she got desperate. "Look," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "What if we fix this privately? No need for lawsuits, no need for drama. Maybe there's something in it for you. We could use your expertise, maybe even a small consulting fee, just for smoothing this over." I let her finish her pitch, then calmly reached into my pocket and hit stop on the voice memo I'd been recording since the meeting ended. She gasped when she realized what I'd done. I smiled. "Finally, that's going to pair nicely with the rest of your file," I said before walking away. The next day, the county opened a formal investigation into HOA corruption, and Karen's name was printed at the top of the inquiry. That week, I held a zoning town hall to address concerns from nearby residents. I expected maybe a dozen people. Over 50 showed up. Word had spread. Neighbors came armed with their own grievances, unapproved fines, threats over fence paint colors, attempts to control gardens and pets. Karen had built a little empire of control through fear and fake authority, and people were finally fed up. One resident stood up and declared, "We should have burned that pool plan the moment she printed it." Another admitted she'd been scared to speak out until she saw someone finally pushing back. One man even brought a copy of the fake flyer and offered it to the board as evidence of collective delusion. After the meeting, the energy was electric. People were organizing, comparing stories, digging into HOA meeting minutes. Even the treasurer of the HOA showed up, pale and twitchy, and after 5 minutes of listening, he stood and announced he was resigning effective immediately. "I didn't sign up to get sued by the county," he said. "I thought we were just going to plant flowers." The room erupted in laughter. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. Her empire was collapsing from all sides. Construction was frozen, her contractors had bailed, and the local media had caught wind of the investigation. Reporters began calling the zoning office, asking about the illegal pool built on county land. One journalist even requested an interview with me. I accepted and calmly walked them through the entire chain of events, from the fake annexation to the broken irrigation line to the forged documents. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't gloat. I just told the truth. The result? A damning article titled Queen of Concrete: How an HOA President Tried to Build a Pool on Someone Else's Land. Karen tried damage control. She sent out mass emails claiming everything was a simple misunderstanding. She posted in local Facebook groups saying that I was a rogue official with a grudge. She even hinted that I had once tried to join the HOA and had been rejected. That was the final straw for some of her board members. One by one, they started defecting. Some wrote public apologies. Others deleted their social media accounts, and a few quietly reached out to me to ask what they could do to make things right. By the end of that week, the HOA was in shambles. Their credibility was shot, their funds were frozen pending legal review, and their so-called leadership team had either resigned or gone silent. And all Karen could do was watch it crumble around her, still clinging to the fantasy that she could fix it with a ribbon and a smile. But this wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about power, entitlement, and accountability. She had trespassed. She had forged. She had lied. And now she would face the full weight of the consequences. And I hadn't even started the demolition process yet. The day the demolition order came through was unusually warm for the season, like even the weather knew something big was about to go down. I arrived at the edge of my field with a folded courts-certified order in my hand and a clipboard under my arm. A small crowd had gathered by the time the first county bulldozer rolled in, kicking up a cloud of dust and tension. Karen showed up 15 minutes later in full panic mode, wearing a ridiculous sun visor, oversized sunglasses, and a tracksuit that looked like it was made for a tennis court meltdown. She ran up to the operator of the bulldozer, waving her arms, yelling something about a restraining order that didn't exist. The man didn't even look at her. He looked at me. I nodded, and the engine rumbled louder. The bulldozer took its first bite out of the concrete shell like it was cardboard. The echo of cracking cement spread across the field like a warning shot, followed by the satisfying crunch of rebar snapping under pressure. Karen shrieked. She jumped in front of the next machine coming down the dirt track, screaming that this was state-sponsored vandalism. I calmly stepped forward and handed the site officer the official zoning court order. Karen tried to snatch it, but he held it high and read it out loud, just for good measure. Her voice cracked as she yelled that we were destroying a community asset. I reminded her again that the community didn't own this land. I did, and that she hadn't gotten a single permit or zoning variance. She screamed that she would appeal. I told her she was welcome to do that after the pool was a pile of rubble. What made it worse for her was that the media had shown up. A couple of local outlets had caught wind of the story and sent camera crews. They weren't interested in her side of the tale anymore. The moment she tried to give a dramatic monologue about saving the neighborhood's future, someone asked why she hadn't checked the land registry first. She stumbled. Another asked about the forged documents. She turned red. When the concrete was fully broken up and the machines began loading chunks into dump trucks, Karen's meltdown reached its peak. She stormed toward the debris pile, lost her footing on the slick mud, and fell face first into the waterlogged remnants of what had been the shallow end. The cameras caught every second. It was replayed online for days under titles like "Karen's Pool Party Gets Canceled by Gravity." I could have walked away then, let the county wrap things up. But I stayed, not to gloat, but to make sure it was done right. The site had to be completely restored, topsoil respread, irrigation repaired, fencing reinstalled. I stood with the inspectors, making notes as they marked the areas of ecological damage caused by the excavation. My farm had suffered more than just cosmetic injury. The broken irrigation line had dried out one of my secondary pastures. The foot traffic had compacted the soil, making it nearly unusable until I reconditioned it. And yet, despite all that, it was strangely satisfying watching the land heal. Karen, however, was not healing. The HOA's finances were under investigation, and every expense related to the illegal construction, including the damage to my property, was now on the ledger. The county assessor's office had begun auditing HOA dues and spending records, and a lot of interesting patterns were coming to light. Apparently, Karen had been approving expedited fees for years without board approval and funneling extra money into vanity projects like gold-plated address signs and premium mulch for her personal garden. The pool fiasco had triggered a deeper excavation than anyone expected, and it was revealing rot far below the surface. To make matters even worse for her, the weather turned against her at just the right moment. A rainstorm swept through the valley the following weekend. The unfinished open construction site turned into a muddy sinkhole. Without proper drainage in place, the entire area flooded. It washed away what little structure had remained and left a crater full of debris, water, and angry frogs. When Karen tried to wade in during another one of her rants, this time to inspect the sabotage firsthand, she slipped. Again. Someone caught that on video too. It wasn't just a mess anymore. It was a joke. A running gag in neighborhood group chats. An internet meme in the making. Still, Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. She tried to salvage her reputation by holding an emergency HOA board meeting, but only 2 people showed up, and one of them was there just to return their access badge. She tried to send an open letter to the neighborhood claiming she'd been tricked by bad advisors and misinformed by invisible bureaucracy. No one bought it. She even posted a video accusing me of vendetta-style zoning abuse, but all it did was attract comments pointing out how calmly I had handled everything while she screeched in the mud like a raccoon who lost its trash can. That's when the auction notices started arriving. The HOA couldn't cover the fines, couldn't pay the restitution, and couldn't maintain basic services anymore. Their community center was the first thing listed, complete with its broken AC, peeling paint, and the fancy grill Karen had ordered for board member use only. I attended the auction out of curiosity and ended up buying that same grill for $10. I wheeled it back to my farm and placed it next to my barn with a small metal sign above it that read, Karen's Legacy Barbecue, powered by entitlement. Word spread fast. Former HOA members began reaching out, not with complaints, but with apologies. Some were embarrassed, others just grateful it was over. A few even asked if they could help with the cleanup. I welcomed them, not because I needed help, but because I wanted them to see the land for what it was, productive, living, and real. Not a canvas for their fantasy architecture. We patched the fencing, cleared debris, and planted new cover crops over the worst-hit areas. Even the cows seemed happier now that the chaos had passed. One of them stood chewing next to the half-dug mud hole like it had no idea its morning walks had helped destroy a political empire. And in the middle of all this recovery, I realized something. Karen's obsession with the pool, her desperate need for control. It wasn't just about power. It was about recognition. She wanted to leave a mark, but in trying to carve her initials into something she didn't own, she ended up being remembered in a way she never intended. Not as a builder, not as a leader, but as the woman who tried to put a pool on the wrong property and ended up in the mud. Twice. The story wasn't just over. It was becoming legend. And as I watched the bulldozers drive off for the last time, I knew she would never be able to rewrite it. Karen made one final move, a desperate swing that came weeks too late and with zero traction. She filed a countersuit, not against the county, not against the contractors, not even against the HOA board members who had abandoned her like rats on a sinking ship. She filed it against me, claiming emotional distress, slander, harassment, and even what she described as zoning-based intimidation. The packet was over 100 pages long, filled with blurry screenshots, screenshots of memes, screenshots of comments on neighborhood posts, and even a poorly printed photo of me standing by my own cows, as if that somehow proved I had orchestrated a farm-based psychological attack on her. I got the notice on a Monday morning and spent 15 minutes laughing before forwarding it to the county's legal department. The court date came and went faster than a sneeze in a tornado. The judge barely let her finish her rambling opening statement before asking her to cite a single zoning law I had broken. She couldn't. Then he asked her how a zoning officer enforcing a court-ordered demolition could be considered harassment. She tried to pivot, claiming that my cows had menaced her, but the judge actually snorted before regaining his composure and dismissing the entire thing on the spot. Karen was so humiliated she didn't even bother leaving through the front door. She used the side exit, like a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. Only there were no cameras waiting. Just a kid playing hacky sack and a squirrel stealing a sandwich. Back home, life had returned to normal. My farm was recovering nicely. The fields were green again, and the soil, while still a bit compacted in places, was bouncing back with the help of some smart rotation and a lot of elbow grease. I'd gone ahead and expanded the fencing where the old pool pit had been. The area that once held folding chairs and angry shouting now hosted clover and alfalfa. The cows had reclaimed it. My dog liked to nap there in the sun, and I finally got around to repainting the barn door that had been scratched up during the truck traffic. It was peaceful, and after weeks of chaos, the silence felt like a prize. Then came the letters, one after another. Former HOA members reached out, not to complain or defend Karen, but to ask for help. With the HOA in shambles and dissolved by a majority vote, people were trying to untangle the mess she'd left behind. One neighbor asked if I could review her property line because Karen had claimed a portion of her backyard was common space. It wasn't. Another family wanted to convert their garage into a guest house and asked me for zoning tips. A retired couple came by with fresh pie and a thank you note. Word had spread. I wasn't just the woman Karen had tried to steamroll. I was the one who'd drawn the line, stood her ground, and quietly made the system work like it was supposed to. I approved several minor variances for former HOA homes, all of them legal, all of them processed properly, and all of them met with genuine gratitude. One neighbor put up a new fence in the color they actually wanted. Another planted a row of sunflowers Karen had once forbidden due to pollen aesthetics. People were reclaiming their properties, not just physically, but emotionally. You could feel it on the street. People were smiling more, spending time outside, chatting over mailboxes instead of bickering about bylaws. It was like Karen's collapse had fertilized a sense of community far stronger than anything her HOA ever achieved. To celebrate the end of the madness, I hosted what I jokingly called the no pool party on my farm. I set up sprinklers and kiddie pools, brought out water balloons, and strung up streamers that read zoned legally and permitted fun only. The grill, Karen's former golden prize, was fired up and cooking burgers. Neighbors brought snacks, lawn chairs, and coolers. Even the cows wandered close to the fence to watch. Someone made matching t-shirts that said, "I survived Karen's pool party," with a cartoon image of her falling in the mud. I didn't endorse the design, but I couldn't stop laughing when I saw it. What struck me most that day was how many people brought their kids, their pets, their laughter. It wasn't about me or the land or even the zoning win. It was about the return to something simple: respect, freedom, and the right to enjoy what you've worked for without interference from clipboard-wielding tyrants. People danced in wet grass, played ridiculous games, and joked about how the field used to be reservations only. One guy even stood where the diving board was supposed to go and cannonballed into a bucket of water, drawing a round of applause and a few bruises. And as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the field, someone pointed out that Karen's house was up for sale. Sure enough, a sign stood at the edge of her manicured lawn, half hidden by the remnants of her custom flower bed. Word was she had listed it quietly, trying to escape the neighborhood before the last embers of her reputation turned cold. A few folks told me she'd been packing boxes in the early morning, trying to avoid attention. No one had seen her outside in days, not since the court's final ruling, not since the article with her picture at the demolition site was published in the papers. What not to do feature. When she finally moved out, she did so in the middle of the night. A moving van pulled in, loaded up, and vanished before dawn. No goodbyes, no notes, just silence and a single porch light left on, as if she'd return someday to reclaim her fantasy empire. But she wouldn't. Her house sat empty for weeks before it was bought by a local school's agricultural program. They planned to use the space as a mini animal sanctuary and garden for kids learning about sustainability. I couldn't have scripted it better if I tried. Where once stood the queen of overreach would now be pigs, chickens, and elementary schoolers learning how to compost. Before the school officially moved in, I stopped by and placed a small handmade sign in the front flower bed. Nothing flashy, just a wooden plaque painted white with red lettering that read, "No trespassing, especially if you have a clipboard." I didn't ask for permission. No one asked me to take it down. As for me, I kept working the land, approving zoning changes when needed, and sleeping well every night. Karen's story became a kind of folklore in the community, an exaggerated tale passed around at barbecues and block parties, always with new details added for flavor. And I never minded. Let them laugh. Let them remember. Because while Karen had tried to build a monument to herself on my soil, all she managed to do was bury her own authority in the mud. And I, quietly and legally, made sure it stayed buried.